I absolutely love the Pro Staff. Every time a new one comes out, I wonder why I don't switch. Then I go back to my gravities and I realize why. But needless to say, when the V14 came out, I was very excited. As you would probably expect, the specs on the V14 are pretty much identical to the V13. It's a 315 gram racket, 16 by 19 string pattern, 21.5 millimeter beam. The swing weight is slightly higher. On average, this one came in to around 334, and the previous one I had around 325 to 329. What's actually new on the V14 compared to the V13? Well, Wilson have added their paradigm bending to the racket. What they claim is that it's supposed to flex more in the throat and less in the hoop, and Wilson says it's supposed to make the racket feel like a Pro Staff 90. The biggest change that has actually come on the V14 is in the way of feel, and it's a subtle change but quite noticeable on court. Because the racket flexes so much more in the throat, it actually feels quite a bit softer. Now, my experience with Pro Staffs in the past have always been a very firm, crisp response with a very well-defined sweet spot and kind of a crack when you hit it well. I didn't really get that with this racket. It's not a noodly flex like something like a Prestige, you could say, but it is noticeably softer and somewhere in the middle between that Prestige style racket and a classic Pro Staff flex. You really feel the ball sink into the racket a lot more than you have on previous Pro Staffs. Now, that actually changes the control profile of this Pro Staff quite a bit. Whereas previous Pro Staffs, I felt a really good directional control because there was so much precision and that really nice feel of crack when you hit it well. This one is more that noodly flex where you can almost guide the ball, kind of grab it and deposit where you want it to go. That's not something I've felt with Pro Staffs in the past, so it's definitely interesting, especially for those of you that might really like that noodly flex of a super classic Prestige. Also, because paradigm bending makes it flex so much more in the throat and so much less in the hoop, there's less movement in the hoop, so less fluttering. That helps make the Pro Staff V14 quite a bit more stable than its predecessor, and gives it, again, a little bit more control in that regard. Now, as you might expect from something softer and more stable, it's quite a bit more comfortable than it was before. I never had a problem with comfort with the previous Pro Staffs, but they definitely had a reputation for being crisp, and I guess you could say a little bit harsh sometimes, especially outside the sweet spot. Here, the sweet spot is bigger and the racket's just generally softer, so you get a much more comfortable hitting experience. I never had any problems, and I don't think anyone will either, but keep in mind, the stiffness is technically actually the same as on the previous one, so just food for thought. One of the things that has kind of set the Pro Staff apart from other rackets in this spec is that it's actually quite a bit more powerful than you might expect. It has a fairly chunky beam, always has, and the PWS system definitely helps it pack a little bit more of a punch. Now, this one is even more powerful than its predecessor. It's very marginal. I actually think the launch angle is pretty much identical, if a little bit higher, but because it has more stability and a slightly bigger sweet spot, it just feels like it's a little bit more powerful. Spin-wise, again, the Pro Staff is more spin-friendly than you might expect from something labeled a classic racket. Now, there is still string mapping in here, which is kind of Wilson's fancy way of saying a sweet spot that gets a little bit tighter in the middle of the string bed. That stops it from becoming a spin monster, but that's totally expected, and it's also part of what makes it so stable, solid, and super predictable. I actually think the fact that this is more powerful and more spin-friendly than other kind of classic rackets like the Prestige is part of what has made it last the test of time so well in the 21st century. Obviously, the game has gotten more powerful, has gotten more spin-friendly, so having a classic feel that still can compete in those elements is really impressive, and it's what makes the Pro Staff so special to me. I also think that this V14 is opening itself up to a slightly wider variety of players because it's a little bit more forgiving and a little bit more stable. It's easier to use, and that extra comfort definitely makes it more viable for those of you that have avoided the Pro Staff because of fear of discomfort or actual discomfort issues. Overall, it's a really solid replacement for the V13. I do think it's worth a demo though, because it is quite different, even though it might not look like that on paper. So if you'd like to try out a demo, we've got them in store, or you can check it out at racketsandrunners.ca.